But then you say that you carved out an exception for domestic violence. Now, if I didn't want to take that class, and I see that there's this loophole already there for me, I just walk in and say to Judge Rosen over here, Your Honor, I'm a victim of domestic violence. There, I go home and I have to take a class. Aren't you inviting people to make that accusation?
Have you read the legislation? Because you're right that we don't want loopholes. And when I was working on drafting the legislation, that was one of my prime concerns, that we're not going to be effective here unless we can close loopholes. By the same token, we have to be able to pass this legislation, and we're trying to get to something where we can balance rights here. We certainly don't want someone who is in a dangerous situation, whose safety is at risk, children's safety is at risk. We don't want those people to be harmed, and we want them to have an out. By the same token, we don't want to encourage false accusations. But if you look at the legislation that we have proposed, the out for domestic violence says that there must be a protective order and that there has to be a hearing and an evidentiary proceeding and a finding of domestic violence before someone can get out of the program and go straight to divorce court and say, I want my divorce.
I think my sense of it is that that's not all that difficult to get nowadays. I think that's the problem. I think these things are just sort of handed out, which, you know, I mean,
This is not a temporary.
They're handed out before divorces.
This is a permanent restraining order, not a temporary restraining order, a permanent restraining order.
You know, the reason that I made this point about, we call it no fault, but it's really driven by fault, and I'm going to address this to Lloyd in particular. You know what? I think that at its core, you know, we say the system is no fault, but at its core, it's really driven with about finding fault. And I just think that what that means is that the system is built on a lie. And I just don't think that if you have a system that's built on a lie, that it can't ever be trusted to find the truth. I'm really disturbed by what you said, that it's all a game. It's not about truth finding. I mean, you know, how can anybody rely on a system that's not geared to find the truth?
Well, anyone who's watched some recent criminal trials on TV is fully aware that trials are not about finding the truth. But in any respect, the issue of no fault during this conversation seems to be applied system-wide with regard to the divorce proceedings and family court proceedings, and it's simply not. The no-fault law that went into effect was a very small issue of grounds for divorce. That's the only thing the no-fault law addresses. It gives the ability people who want to be divorced, especially when you've got a couple who mutually want to be divorced, the ability to obtain a divorce without pointing the finger of blame at their other spouse.
Yeah, but what we did, I think, I just pointed a finger at you, I'm sorry. I think what we've done...
Can't we use uncontested divorces as such?
Uncontested divorces we can use if the parties agree, but even even in an uncontested divorce, prior to the no-fault law, one party had to blame the other party for the breakdown of the marriage.
Lloyd,
because that's irreconcilable differences at that point.
There is no irreconcilable differences in New York prior to the no-fault law.
That's right.
So in order for two parties who both want a divorce to be divorced, one had to, at least on paper, swear that the other party did something wrong.
Right, and I think here's what we've done. I think we've shifted the fault-finding phase to where the children are. I don't think we've done away with no fault. That was my point. I mean, it should be when people split. I think fault should be a component of divorce. I think the court should always be on the side of the person who's left behind, who's aggrieved. And what we've done is we've taken the fault component out of the divorce phase. Where have we put it? Where the children are. It's all about finding fault when it comes to custody, when it comes to the kids. It's a backward system. Do you not agree with what I'm saying?
But the one who's left behind, don't you find that sometimes the one that's left behind was because of false allegations?
Yes.
Sometimes?
Yes, okay. You know, we just have a few minutes left, and what I want to do is I just want to ask you this, all three of you, because I think this is what the public would respond to. I'm struck by the fact that what divorce is about is that we take people when they're at the lowest points in their lives. Really suffering, vulnerable, scared, depressed, maybe suicidal. When they most need support and compassion, what do? We throw them into the system. We treat them like criminals. If they don't come up with some exorbitant amount of money, we throw them in jail. We drive them to the edge of suicide. Now, what's going on, and how can you reform a system where the people who work in the system preside over that result? It seems to me that there's a fundamental lack of compassion and sensitivity in the people who work in the system, and it's most needed here. Do you understand what I'm saying? Does it make any sense? How do you fix that? How do you change people's hearts? That's what I want to know. Because I don't think the system can be reformed legislatively with any of your proposals if the people who work in the system are lacking in compassion.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right. And my proposal is not just a legislative proposal. What we are actually doing as well with our blogs and writing about it is actually trying to make people aware of the problems. And I think you're right. I think that this goes beyond just the problems in the system. I think it's endemic of our hyper-individualistic society, too, and our society that's all about me and what I need. And the stresses, we have lost empathy, we've lost compassion, and once we get to the courthouse door, forget it. That's not where we're going to see it. Everything is going to take over. The lawyers are going to take over, and if you don't go with the program,
Were you treated harshly during your divorce? Did the people in the system treat you with a heavy hand? And
yes, and the first time that I walked into the system, it was, what are the grounds for divorce? Well, I was in New York before it changed to no fault. And again, they were basically saying, so what have you, agreed on as far as grounds are concerned? And I wasn't going to agree to grounds. I hadn't done anything wrong. I was the one that was being sued. I hadn't done anything wrong. I wanted to save my marriage. I knew there was a train wreck coming. And the first thing that I was met with was, what are the grounds? And a judge looking down at me and saying, you better rethink this, because if you don't decide to do this, then I'm taking over your life.
You're trying to save your marriage, and you're met with an implied threat.
Exactly.
How do you fix that? That's what I don't.
The litigants are threatened a lot of times. I know that even if they're trying to resolve something, they are threatened.
What happened to the people who work in the system that they deal with this with such a heavy-handed way? How do you deal with it? You're in the system every day. How do you deal with it?
My perspective as an attorney, as a trial attorney, is different from Beverly's perspective as having had been a litigant. And my perspective is that the requirement to prove grounds in a divorce only created an opportunity for one party to use some undue leverage against the other party. To basically put the proverbial gun to their head, pay me more money, give me more assets, or I'm not going to agree to the divorce. And you were keeping people prisoner in their own marriage because of a financial dispute. The no-fault law eliminated that tactic.
Yeah, but
now, it might not be the best
also
way.
lets people walk out of a marriage without any negative consequence whatsoever. You would have more of a legal obligation to the auto mechanic to pay your bill than you would to a spouse, and without it, you can benefit from the betrayal. It makes no sense to me, Lloyd.
Well, that concern goes back to what you said earlier about us having a 19th century mentality. The fault law came into existence to protect women who at the time were not educated, were not skilled, had no experience outside the home. The law back then was designed to protect women. They changed the law because women don't need that protection anymore.
But they're still getting that protection, absolutely to the hilt, because they have the good social network to say, okay, do this, do this. They congregate with their friends, and everyone's like, do this, don't do this, don't let them do this, get them arrested, Go to the social battered women's groups already, pretend that you're being battered, pretend.
Right.
They absolutely go in there, they get their OPs, and there you go.
Right, well that's not created by the law, that's created by people
Society.
and motivation. And that's created by our social mores. I've personally been in the hallways of the courthouse where some woman came up to my client and told her, just tell the court your husband hurt you, your husband threatened you, your husband hit you, and they'll throw him out of the house. And that happened right in front of me.
Yeah, but if that lawyer is doing it and you're not,
This wasn't a lawyer.
No.
This was another person going through a divorce proceeding.
Right. Just quick, we're almost out of time. Can I ask you, what do you think the practical politics are? Do you think your proposal is going to get anywhere, practically speaking?
I think practically speaking it is. We have support in many state legislatures and people on the ground in a lot of states. A few states are going to introduce this in 2011, and we're going to see at least a dozen states introduce it in 2012. So we do have that support. I think that's going to happen, and I think that since we're limiting it, we're not getting rid of no fault, and we're limiting it to
I'm sorry, we're out of time. But you got to come back, all three of you, because we're just really getting started
we gotta
with
come
this. We're just scratching the surface. Thank you, Beverly Willett. Thank you, Lloyd Rosen. Thank you, Maria Rauch.
welcome.
Thank you for watching MensNet. For MensNet, this is Mel Feit. We'll see you next time.